Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join Real Story Group for today's webinar on email and marketing automation for 2024. It's an exciting subject for us. We've been getting a lot of inquiries from our customers lately about this topic. And so our founder and CEO, Tony Byrne, is going to walk through this 30-minute presentation. And as always, we will have time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, feedback, or anecdotes you'd like to share, you can enter those into the questions tab and then go to webinar control panel. We'll have the slides available to you by the end of the week, and then there will be a recording of this presentation made available to our subscribers, of which I see a number on the line. So thanks, special thanks for all of you for taking some time to join us today. As we get started, just wanted to talk a little bit about a Real Story Group and specifically the markets that we cover. You'll see here our famous or perhaps infamous MarTech stack vendor map that we recently updated a couple of months ago. You'll see that within our research and advisory services, we cover 9 different markets with our latest edition on AI for marketing to be added pretty soon. But you'll see what we're going to cover today during this presentation is the green line. Outbound Marketing Platforms. And so I'm going to turn things over to Tony, and he'll take us through today's session. Tony?
Great. Thanks, Scott. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. I'm a little bit under the weather today, but still super excited about this particular topic. As Scott mentioned, we're going to be covering mostly the dark green line here, Outbound Marketing Platforms. But I do want to mention the light green line because that research will be ready by the end of the month. You can pre-order today. Scott can tell you later about that. And AI is definitely affecting all of these markets. So we'll be talking about AI in this context as well a bit later in this session. So we can't really talk about any single engagement channel these days without talking about all of the channels in the full stack and what's going on across the stack. If you're looking at email and marketing automation in isolation, that's fundamentally a mistake. You want to really understand where this technology going forward fits into your overall stack. So I'll take a really brief historical tour. As an analyst firm, we create reference models. When we founded the company in 2001, this was our first reference model. It was really around web content management. So your world then was mostly around inbound, right? You had a CMS that handled your editorial workflow, published out web pages to wireless devices, maybe syndicated some content. And then towards the end of the decade, of course, email became a more important channel. And by the 2010s, we had a new reference model where you had multiple different channels, major channels along the top, production, interaction, and delivery services in between, communities, portals, print, mobile middleware, that sort of thing. And then you see these 4 colored boxes down here. Digital asset management emerged, web content management is so important, and then marketing automation and email and essentially outbound marketing. Along with, at the time, social engagement. Those were very often the blue and the yellow box were very often the same vendors. Usually on top of some sort of customer data backbone, although mostly it's customer data confusion. So this was kind of the model that everyone was working on and really modernizing these 4 different colored boxes here, trying to get good at each one of them. The problem was that it was very difficult to integrate among them, and you can see these triangles here where we're trying to integrate content and services and data from them, and they were never designed to be integration environments. And so what ended up happening is that a lot of these became highly siloed. Right, they were highly siloed, very elaborated platforms and teams, but also highly siloed teams, and that just really starting towards the end of the 2010s, and certainly with the advent of the pandemic, this was really becoming untenable. And so what we're seeing for the 2020s is a new target reference model for more integrated customer experience across what is a growing number of channels. And so the idea here is that you still do have these different channels, including email, but also still social, web, print, SMS, face-to-face, in-product is an important one, so on and so forth. And the idea is that if you are going to be effective and coherent across these channels, then you need to abstract or decouple some core services from these engagement channels and be able to operate them at an enterprise level. And so the key ones for us here in particular are unified customer data, journey orchestration, and omni-channel customers, omni-channel content, right? These are things that you want to manage in a way that's not necessarily channel specific. And so what does this mean then in terms of a reference model? So this is our latest reference model for what we call a composable stack for the 2020s. Now, not everyone is here, but we do see among our large enterprise subscribers a desire to get here or to get to something close to this, right? This is a reference model. So when we work with a large enterprise, we typically customize it for their particular needs. This also happens to be the B2B variant. The B2C variant is slightly different, but you get the idea here that there's these engagement channels across the top. Then again, interaction and delivery environments, websites, storefronts, applications, so on and so forth. Then still these engagement services, of which outbound marketing is one service, right? But the key thing here, the key insight here is that there are enterprise foundation services that are not bound to a particular channel. And so they fall roughly into three columns, or we call them the three pillars of customer experience, which is content and information on the left, and then data oriented services in the middle, and then decisioning oriented services on the right. So decisioning is things like, it's kind of a highfalutin word, but it means like test and optimize, personalization, journey orchestration, the logic basically that goes into a customer marketing experience. And then of course you can see these pink boxes on top, which is really what's taken off, especially in the last year or so, which is the AI components for these generative AI, insights AI, decisioning AI. Now, many vendors across all of these different boxes are injecting their own OEM'd, either they're OEM'd or they built AI services and injecting them into their particular platform. We're going to argue that particular larger enterprises are going to want to manage these more at an enterprise level. So we have AI more as kind of a foundational service here. But the idea here is that outbound marketing now is not really so much like the center of your MarTech stack. It's not that that managing campaigns, delivering messages is unimportant. It remains very important. But it's part and parcel of a larger series of channels and part and parcel of a more enterprise-wide approach to marketing and customer experience. And so this has really enormous impacts on the sorts of investments that you should be making in 2024 and beyond. Now, as we talk a little bit about the evolving marketplace for outbound marketing, it's actually a couple different marketplaces. I wanted to just remind you that there's the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you might disagree with, anything you do agree with, something you want to share, feel free to put it there. We'll definitely have time at the end to address your questions. Okay. So the outbound marketing marketplace really is actually two marketplaces. So you have at the top here, B2C-oriented email service providers. So these are for essentially mass marketing, often typically to millions of customers. These are designed to be highly scalable platforms for sending out high volumes of messages in a B2C context. B2B-oriented marketing automation platforms are really designed to set up a sales-oriented marketing funnel. And so again, they're primarily built around email messaging, but they may also include some light personalization or some other services. Typically, the numbers in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and very much integrated with your Salesforce automation platform. Now, that's why the fact that these are two different markets are why there are vendors like Adobe and like Salesforce and like Oracle that have different products for these two spaces. But they both relate to outbound marketing, and they both functionally do very similar things. Now, there is a bit of a challenge here, and we've certainly seen it among some of our own subscriber base, are what do I do if I'm a mass market B2B? Because some of you are. And that's a really difficult place to be in the market because the B2B-oriented platforms aren't always priced or supported to support millions of records. Or if you're B2B to C, How do you deal with it? Do I need 2 different platforms? Can I do it all in one? We've been going through some, really difficult conversations, but also finding some creative solutions with some of our larger subscribers there. So Jamie is asking, why are these email service providers as opposed to omni-channel? So all of these vendors will call themselves omni-channel, Jamie. What they really are is multi-channel outbound. So yes, they will all offer you some SMS. They can all do connect to let's say dropship, direct mail, that sort of thing. Email tends to be at the core of almost all of these, and so email is kind of their dominant sort of endpoint within their campaign palettes. But at the end of the day, they're outbound campaign management systems that can typically do various forms of messaging. So that's a good clarification. The interesting thing about this market is that these platforms pretty consistently in survey after survey show up as among the most commonly replaced, which is really interesting. So here we see marketing automation, email distribution, and multi-function marketing suites from the like of Oracle, Adobe, Salesforce. Those are still primarily outbound driven. This is from MarTech in 2022. Their 2021 results were very similar. So this is a trend here where organizations are pretty consistently replacing these things. In this case, it was almost 1 in 4 organizations who are replacing their outbound marketing platform as opposed to just 1 in 8 where they were replacing their digital asset management platform. And so I think there's been a lot of disappointment around this technology, but there's also just been a lot of evolution over time, and as stacks have evolved, organizations have found different needs. So let's talk a little bit about why is all this replacement going on? Just from our Real Storybook's perspective, what are we actually seeing out there? So the first reason why enterprises are switching is they may shift in terms of their complexity needs. So they may be using a simpler solution like MailChimp for Constant Contact or HubSpot, and they really need something a little bit more sophisticated and are willing to pay maybe more 2 or 3x or more to get that. Or alternatively, we've actually worked with some enterprises to go the other way, which is they're in a highly complex, very often older platform. And our story is, hey, something like a HubSpot and a MailChimp might work very, very well for you, and allow you not just to do this much less expensively, to do it much simpler. Constant Contact, probably not. There's issues with that platform, but you get the idea that organizations sometimes move up and down in terms of the complexity of what they need, and therefore the level of resources that they have to apply to it to get the same amount of value. The other thing that we see fairly often is what we just described as an irreparable relationship. So there may be problems on both sides where you've implemented some very complex platform, heavily customized it, and now your staff is just pulling their hair out. They're struggling with it. You've lost patience with the vendor. It could be that the vendor has lost patience with you. We see this across all of MarTech, but particularly, I would say, in this space, we tend to see it more often, where it's just the relationship has played out its course. It's not going well. In theory, you could relaunch in a greenfield with this particular platform, but the reality is that your relationship with that vendor is beyond repair, and so you're looking elsewhere. And we see this a lot in the email and marketing automation space. And the third one is really interesting, which is that there are a number of aging vendors out there that really have the vendor has essentially, in all but name, put them into a retirement home. And so they're taking very good care of that platform, but they're not really advancing it. It's not getting any younger. And so that's okay if your ambitions aren't getting any more sophisticated, but if they are, it's a bit of an issue, right? And so there's a number of these. You could almost kind of sort of put Salesforce Marketing Cloud here too. We've had several of our larger subscribers sign up for Salesforce Marketing Cloud in the last year, 18 months. We've also had at least 3 of them leave Salesforce Marketing Cloud because of the intense technical debt. So Salesforce is almost there, but if you look at, this is Adobe, IBM, Oracle, Eloqua, Salesforce, Pardot, Primo. Some Marigold is essentially just a rebranding of 4 or 5 very old ESPs and maps. So you get the idea here. There's a number of older solutions that in particular are not really well adapted to the stack of the future. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But first, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about, okay, let's say you are looking to replace this technology in 2024. What's the best way to select? So we have some pretty firm ideas about this. My colleague Jared and I, in fact, wrote a book called The Right Way to Select Technology. You can find it from Rosenfeld Media. The idea is to apply a more agile-ish design thinking approach to what's traditionally been a more waterfall approach to selecting technology. And so it's much more business-focused, it's team-based, it's empirical, which means it's test-based, and you iterate in terms of learning what you need to do as you filter down the vendors in an adaptive process. So what this looks like in practice is you look at a marketplace that may altogether have 15 to 30 vendors, and you create diverse user stories, and those user stories then help you then build down to a vendor long list. You might create an RFP, or what we call an RFD, which is request for demo, so you're narrowing down to maybe 3 to 8 vendors. And the key thing is that you have them demo your use cases, not their use cases. So you build your to-be use cases with narrative stories, have the vendors come in and test those, apples to apples, the fabulous way of realizing is this going to be a good fit or not. Then you always want to do a hands-on bake-off. I'll talk about that in a second. But how do you get to a short list? So I ended up founding Real Story Group 22 years ago because of this quadrant on the left here. Now, of course, I'm making fun of the magic quadrant here, but this idea that there's some vendors that are just winners and losers generically. And what we found actually is when we were implementing some of these tools, and we've certainly seen that today, that many of the vendors in the upper right actually are some of the older and larger vendors, often have very problematic platforms, often with a lot of technical debt. They're just really good at analyst relations. So you can check out on Real Story Group's site at realstorygroup.com our Real Quadrant shortlist generator. And so with that, you actually input what is important to you with respect to the scenarios that you're really trying to achieve and the strategic considerations underneath all of this and what you're looking for strategically in a vendor. And it generates a custom shortlist for you. And if you're a subscriber, then it outputs all of the research as well behind that. So you definitely want to not just look at, standard kind of lists of who you think of, sort of who's who in this market and go after the bigger names, but actually what's the right fit for you. Now, again, you go through this process, you review proposals and demos, and you come down to 2 finalists. Always, always, always do hands-on bake-off. Too many organizations skip this. You can definitely do it. We've done several in the past 18 months with campaign and email marketing technology. It doesn't have to be a long exercise. Typically, it's a 3 to 5 day sprint with a couple of different vendors where you have real test cases, real data and content. It could be dummy data and content, but it's structured the way you have it. You have your people in a real live environment, and you test it. And then not just which is the better solution, but also what do you need to do internally to really leverage this technology going forward. So it helps you avoid shelfware and gets you to an MVP much faster as well. Then in the end, you may want to do some final technical testing with respect to integration testing or whatnot, do a proof of concept while you're negotiating the contract with a single finalist. But first, we always recommend a head-to-head, hands-on bake-off, and you can definitely do it with outbound marketing platforms. So what does this all mean for 2024 and beyond? So I want to come back to where we were starting this half hour, which is, this reference model for the composable stack. And I'm going to call this the great decoupling. In other words, what's happening in the smart enterprises, it's not just happening, the smart enterprises are very intentional about this, is decoupling content and information, data, and certain forms of decisioning services from these engagement channels where that logic, content, and data is trapped, and instead managing it at an enterprise level and then funneling it through these engagement channels, right? So with respect to outbound marketing, it's very interesting because certainly with respect to the content components and the data, outbound marketing platforms are very poor at managing content. I mean, nobody likes to do authoring in their email platform. Nobody likes to manage or find block components in their outbound marketing platforms. Their content and asset management is awful. Even though for many of you it may be your marketing database, they tend to be terrible platforms for managing data. Yeah, you can build simple segments, but they're just not really meant to be data management platforms. So ideally, you would have a CDP or something like it underneath where you were generating a lot of the key triggers and segments that then activate an outbound engagement. So what this means for the future is, again, this emergent decoupling of content, data, campaign, and journey logic within omnichannel. So now already we've been seeing born digital firms doing email block management and campaigns at a lower level in their stack, right? And managing the data at a lower level in their stack. And what they do then is they bolt on an inexpensive programmatic or transactional message sender for high volume assembly and delivery and skip having a traditional ESP and map at all. So you can see some of the programmatic senders listed at the bottom. Now, this isn't necessarily for everyone, but essentially they're saying, look, if I've already got my customer data and I've already got all of my content component blocks and I've already got all of my campaign logic already laid out, and what do I need an ESP for? I'll just do all of this, programmatically through an API. It's definitely harder for what I would say post-digital or traditional firms to do this, but it's clearly the direction as we go through the rest of this decade. And I have a feeling most of us are going to be doing this most of the time over the next 5 to 6 years, and so you really want to consider any new ESP or map investment as lasting, 4 to 5 years maximum, because I think we're all going to a more API-based programmatic world for this, where you'll still have sophisticated programs, very sophisticated block assembly for highly personalized messages, but those will all be done sort of underneath your messaging environment. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that AI is going to accelerate this transition. So we're going to use AI to, first of all, generate content and block variants. That's already happening. We're going to use AI to figure out which blocks should go to which people at which time. That's already happening. We're going to use AI to help interpret the results and modify the campaigns. That's already happening. We're going to use AI to just optimize our campaigns in general. That's already happening. So all of this assumes that you have some enterprise-wide AI and ML capabilities that can help you orchestrate all of this and not just inject some AI capabilities into what is this kind of an old school ESP. So not just customer data platforms on the data side, but we're seeing, particularly in the last year to 18 months, the rise of what we call an omnichannel content platform. This is not a headless web CMS. It's really a set of vendors that are coming out of the digital asset management or DAM space that can manage component narrative, component images, component video, and data as content, and do it in an object-oriented way, and essentially manage these building blocks that can then be deployed across various engagement services, but particularly outbound marketing, right? And so this is the content side to the story as well, that if you can decouple component content management from your outbound marketing platform, then you can manage those components much more effectively and also make sure that they're integrated carefully with all of your other engagement channels as well. So that's really kind of a future architectural vision. As a practical matter, let's wrap up talking about what are some key takeaways for 2024, and then we'll have time for 5 minutes of questions or so. So the outbound marketing marketplaces remain highly fragmented, which means that there's a lot of vendors, but they're also bifurcated between vendors that are modern and that can plug into a more modern MarTech stack, and those, quite frankly, that are older and have a lot of technical debt and are mostly platforms that you leave rather than license afresh. You want to remain cautious about overloading your outbound marketing platforms with a lot of bloated services, because those services are only going to work within that channel. They're not going to be omni-channel. And so you really want to think about maybe getting simpler at this tier rather than more complex. And part of that is just relates to this meta trend around the externalization of previously bundled services. Another way of saying that a number of these services are already in the sophisticated, modern, savvy enterprises are getting decoupled from the outbound marketing layer and are being managed as an enterprise component. So in terms of content and block management, A/B testing, personalization, analytics, customer data management, these are all things we're not going to be relying on our outbound marketing platform to supply these services anymore. And the problem for you is that many, if not all, of the older vendors are not leaning into this trend. And so therefore, if you're thinking about leaving them, it's probably becoming increasingly a good time to leave those vendors. Of course, as you think about new technologies, you want to apply design thinking to your selection process, and don't apply, old school technology to what is essentially a new school challenge here. So you do have an opportunity to get a more modern solution. Always make sure you do that in a test-based way, and so that way you can really focus a lot on marketer usability as well. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Real Story Group can help you live and breathe this stuff. We love to help organizations make good technology decisions, whether they're selections or stack choices or whatever. So you can do that three ways. One is you can license our outbound marketing research, get access to our Real Quadrant generator, get access to all the research, call us up on the phone and ask us questions. Many people just do that. The second approach is what we call a full stack subscription, where you license all of our research and we advise you on your broader stack strategies as well as your individual selection strategies. Then a subset of those people, joined our MarTech Stack Leadership Council. So we just met in Washington, D.C., talking about AI and organizational models. We'll be meeting again early next year in Europe, and also online, kind of continuing the conversations. Feel free to chat with Scott about opportunities there for joining this private exclusive group. So I see some questions coming in, and we'll be addressing those in a second. But as I just look at those questions, Scott, you can just talk about next steps.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. And I just wanted to reiterate that you're welcome to take a look at our research on this topic. You can always download samples on our website. So if you want to take a look at a sample of the email and marketing automation research, you can do so, along with all the other areas that we cover. Also, if you're thinking about how effective you are with your marketing technology right now and looking to see how you compare with other organizations, we've been having a series of webinars on MarTech effectiveness that will continue on November 29th at 1 p.m., overcoming key barriers to MarTech effectiveness. So please feel free to join us for that. And as Tony mentioned, I'm happy to answer questions about the council, our Stack Advisory services, and any other research offerings that we have available. But for now, let's get to the questions. It looks like we have several popping into the queue.
Yeah, Jamie's asking, what recommendations are there for orchestrating user experience and workflow to compose a platform made up with multiple vendors? So I'm going to assume by compose a platform, you mean, Jamie, compose an experience that where multiple vendors are involved. And this is unfortunately still somewhat difficult. It takes you out of the realm of outbound marketing and into the realm of journey orchestration, which is a very different kind of set. Some outbound marketing platforms call themselves journey builders, but they're not. They're really just messaging platforms. Journey building is really more around listening and responding across multiple channels, including paid media channels, outbound messaging, and inbound personalization and recommendations. It's a somewhat immature space of technology. We cover the journey orchestration vendors, but also I think as organizations we're a little bit immature, but that's really the kind of methodology and the approach you should look at. Florian is asking, have you seen success of enterprises decoupling email send using an API-based DSP and content creation? Absolutely, Florian. We've seen, again, we've seen more success around some born digital enterprises doing this, startups and others, where their content is born componentized. They manage it in an omni-channel content platform, and they organize logic, often infused with AI, around which component should go to which person. So that means that they also typically have a fairly advanced customer data store, and then they use the API of the programmatic sender to just essentially send the right components to the right mail envelope to the right person. So this approach tends not to be as user-friendly when you're trying to do one-off or ad hoc campaigns. So I think that's still kind of a gap in this approach. But for organizations where they tend to have more always-on campaigns, where you tend to doing a lot of triggered messages based on customer activity, it can work very, very well. Stanton is asking, how do you see these meta trends affecting the mid-market where they still want to see these capabilities in their tools? Yeah, I think in the mid-market, and HubSpot is a really good example of that. So with Acton, you'll still tend to see a lot of capabilities coupled within a single platform because their stack is going to be less composable. And so they're looking for a single provider to provide a lot more services. And they're willing to put up with some degree of those services maybe not being totally optimal, but they're all in the same place. So HubSpot is a good example of that. Some of the lower end platforms that now live under Marigold are an example of that. And so, that can be a good solution. I think you'll still see in the mid-market, obviously, the advent of generative AI and some decisioning or predictive AI. You will need to be very careful there about just what services are injected and what terms in those platforms before you start generating one set of content and experiences in your email channel and then potentially a very different set of content and experiences in your web channel. But I think, Stanton, that the conversation today was a little bit more geared, honestly, towards larger enterprises. Adwin, it's good to see you here. Your question is, what's your take on warehouse native engagement platforms? In the space that will grow, and is it something that can change the classic direction between B2C and B2B platforms? So warehouse native means that they don't copy your data over. And so in this space, there's really only one vendor that does that. It's MessageGears. And it's architecturally very elegant, but it also creates some limitations, both from a usability perspective, from a segment creation perspective, and from an eventing kind of perspective. And it can sometimes create some latencies in terms of activating that data out of the data warehouse. So it seems architecturally very elegant. The reason why that space hasn't really taken off, Adwin, is because there are also some significant limitations to that model as well. I don't think it's going to change the classic distinction between B2C and B2B. Again, if we look at MessageGears, it's very B2C oriented. Like really, the only reason to do this you use MessageGears because you have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of records in your data warehouse, and you want to activate out of that, rather than pushing all of those records to an ESP. Okay, that wraps us up for today. Thanks for staying a little bit longer with us. Always a joy to share some time with you on a topic that I trust you can see is near and dear to our hearts. So again, if you have any questions after this, feel free to reach out at the coordinates you see on your screen. Otherwise, for Scott Dill, this is Tony Burns saying so long for now.